When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg, and I'm the host of Yoga, Birth, Babies, and I'm calling this episode Why We Need to Stop Labeling the Difficult Child. In full transparency, I have one of those kids that sometimes is labeled the difficult child. And the reason I wanted to do this episode is because I see that not just with my child, but so many other kids get pigeonholed because of their behavior. And one thing I discovered in this conversation and conversations with other therapists is a lot of times it's not necessarily about the behavior showing up on the surface, but looking what's below that behavior and understanding what the root cause of that. So that's what we're going to go into today. We're going to look at how families can reframe and examine where these challenging behaviors come from and helping them identify the root causes. We're also going to talk about dysregulation, what it is, how it presents in kids, and the importance of parents finding their grounding, finding their regulation when their child's having these big emotions. We also talk about some tools that kids can use to identify their feelings and as things are starting to percolate before it boils over the top. I think this is a really important conversation, not just for the child that has the more challenging behaviors, but for those around so they're not the ones putting this title on a child. So to have this conversation, I have Nina Essel. Let me tell you a little bit about Nina. First of all, I'm proud to say we are both in the same community here in New Jersey, in South Orange, Maplewood. So Nina is a licensed clinical social worker with over a decade of experience as a school social worker supporting children and families. Nina holds a Master's of Social Work from Columbia University and a Master's of Science in Childhood General and Special Education from Bank Street College of Education. Nina is an advanced certified trainer in the Nurtured Heart approach, as well as Komochi's, a social emotional learning curriculum. Currently, Nina is a parenting coach and consultant, providing one-on-one coaching, parenting workshops, and professional training. And Nina has some really wonderful points and support to offer all those that have the child with big emotions, again, as well as friends, family, and just for society to understand these kids without judgment. I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation. Before we get to my chat with Nina, as always, I love to give some updates about the studio at Prenatal Yoga Center. Things are plowing forward, and I'm really excited and proud to say that our workshops are filling. So if you're thinking about your childbirth education class, your lactation or newborn prep class, don't wait till the last minute because we're often sold out. Grab those as soon as you can. We have literally the next year of workshops already figured out. So just you can look at our website or let us know the date. And of course, we've got our in-studio and online prenatal and postnatal yoga classes. And the other part of what we do is we train teachers in our methodology of prenatal yoga. It's a very specific methodology with our 3 pillars of asana, education, and community. So if any of that is exciting to you, check all that out on our website, prenatalyogacenter.com. And 2 more things I always like to offer. If you have a topic that I haven't covered in a while, you want a different perspective, let me know. You can always reach me at deb@prenatalyogacenter.com. And if you think you'd be a great speaker on the podcast, you have a topic that you're passionate about that you think would serve this community, reach out. We have an application you can fill out on our website to be a guest. And then I have a request of you, our listener, our community member. Please leave a rating and review for the podcast because it helps people find our podcast. All right, that's enough of me. Let's take a super quick break. When we come back, please enjoy my conversation with Nina.
You were probably expecting one, but got pregnant with two. We get it. Twin Talks encourages moms who are expecting twins as well as experienced moms of multiples. Together, we'll explore the unique challenges new parents face when raising two or more children of the same age. Join us as we embrace the joys of parenting when you've got double the duty. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Twin Talks podcast." And be sure to visit newmommymedia.com to check out our other parenting shows, Preggy Pals, Newbies, Parent Savers, and the Boob Group. Twin Talks, parenting times two.
Hi, Nina. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I am really excited to talk to you about this topic. And it's funny that I reached out because I've heard your name in our community, Soma, our little South Orange Maplewood community for a while. And when I was thinking about, I thought, I'm like, okay, I need someone that works with kids, that works with sometimes kids that are labeled difficult.
Yeah.
And then one of my friends mentioned your name and then another, and then my neighbor mentioned your name. I'm like, clearly I should be calling Nina. So
Come to the right place.
I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. But before we get deeper into our conversation, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and what led you to social work and focusing on kids.
Yeah. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I also have a master's in childhood general and special education. Originally, when I was doing my undergrad degree, I thought I was going to go into special education and be like a behavioral disability self-contained teacher. That was originally my plan when I was applying to grad schools. And then I found a really awesome dual degree program through Columbia University for social work and Bank Street for my master's in education. And as I did that, I just really fell in love with school social work. So I was a school social worker in K-8 schools for 10 years, specifically with the child study team. So worked with a lot of special education students with a variety of needs and behavioral challenges. And then 6 years ago, I launched Balanced Kids, which is my parent coaching and consulting work that I do now to support families who are experiencing challenges with their kids, who think that there may be a diagnosis or who recently came to a diagnosis but really aren't sure what to do, who to turn to, what services their kids need. It can all feel really overwhelming. And so that's the work that I do now with families. And then I also do professional development and training for childcare agencies, schools, and other educators around working with neurodivergent kids or kids with challenging behavior.
So you're definitely the person to have the conversation of what I titled this already in my head is why we need to stop labeling, in quotes, the difficult child. So let's jump into that. So again, I reached out to discuss that idea because I really think we need to stop labeling the difficult child. Because I think that when the child gets labeled that, other kids maybe see it or hear it, or teachers start to put that label on them, or parents or other family friends. And then the child starts to feel, I think, shame around that label. So I guess we should start with the harm of this pigeonholing and then also discuss what's behind the difficult behavior that's showing up on the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the core conversation that I have with clients in our first session, unpacking where challenging behavior comes from. But another slide that I have in the work that I do is a quote from Peggy O'Mara, and she says, "The way we talk to children becomes their inner voices." And I do a lot of work, especially with educators, but also with parents, around the language that we use to describe our children or talk about children becomes how they think about themselves. It becomes a part of their core identity, right? And we have to help kids separate their challenges from who they are. We all have things that are hard for us and things that are easy for us, things we need to work on. And that doesn't make us a bad person. It's just those are the areas that we need some more support in. So how can we kind of destigmatize that? It also boils down to, the way our society is set up, where we view behavior as a matter of kids choosing to do it. We see it as a matter of will. And this, if you've ever read Dr. Ross Greene's book, he wrote The Explosive Child. His latest one is Raising Human Beings. He dives a lot into this, right? Kids with challenging behavior, society often is all focused on they're choosing to do it. And so we make sticker charts or clip charts, or we have consequences or timeouts, punishments, rewards. Everything is kind of focused on this binary of carrot and stick, consequences, rewards. And those are the only tools so many educators and parents have when it comes to supporting kids with behavior. And a lot of times people will come to me because the sticker charts aren't working anymore. The consequences aren't working anymore. They've upped the ante. They're taking away screen time for all kinds of things, and it's just not working. And our work is really around helping parents understand that behavior is actually not the problem to be solved. Behavior is communication. Behavior is a symptom of an underlying issue. And it's our job as the adults in the situation to do that unpacking with the child, to understand what about my expectation is hard? What about getting ready for school is hard? What about transitioning off screens is hard? What about brushing your teeth at night is hard? And really digging down into it and not worrying about it just because they're choosing not to, it's just because they want to be difficult. But like, is there a sensory need? Is it transition? Is there separation anxiety? Like, there can be so many different underlying reasons for why a child exhibits certain behaviors. And until we do that unpacking, we can't figure out what the most appropriate next steps are.
So what is your way? Gosh, I have so many questions. I'm going to start with from that. My brain is like popcorn. So what is your way of going that level deeper? So I can relate I have a neurodivergent child, and as you said those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I live in that world.
Yeah.
And on so many levels. And so things like transitions,
Yeah.
getting off screen time. How are you finding what's underneath it? I typically think anxiety is one of the biggest ones, at least for my child. How do you get below the surface?
Yeah. So some of it is by, understanding more how the child works. What are their strengths? What are areas of growth? What are some of the skills that they lack? Dr. Greene's work also talks about lagging skills or thinking skills. So executive functioning skills that kids tend to struggle with. Things like flexibility, taking someone else's perspective, your ability to regulate emotions, ability to regulate your energy level, right? So being able to like become energetic or being able to calm down once you're energized, being able to see the gray. A lot of our kids with challenging behavior are very black and white thinkers, and it's like an all or nothing. And so when we do some of that unpacking, and I have a list of, a checklist of skills that we kind of think about to help parents with that reframe to move away from kids do well if they want to kids do well if they can, and thinking about what skills are getting in the way of this challenge. What skills are showing up in this for my child? And if it's anxiety, then it's like, what about anxiety? Do they get stuck with the thoughts? Do we need to build their capacity for coping? What about transitioning off screens makes them anxious? Is it more, sometimes kids really have to finish something and their brain just has a really hard time switching tracks. And so do we as parents need to give more of a runway or countdown or have some type of transition plan? Sometimes when it comes to transitions, we can't transition kids from a highly preferred activity to like their least favorite thing. We need some kind of like transitional transition in the middle there. So, having a kid transition off screens to something that they kind of like to do, come read a book with me, and then we'll, go brush our teeth or something like that, where you kind of come up with this little short activity in between to kind of help them slowly transition out of things.
So you mentioned a slide, I'm guessing you do as a presentation, with some tools to help reframe. What would be some of those tools to help families reframe what that challenging behavior is?
Yeah. So when I work with families, we really pull up that thinking skills inventory and think about what are the skills that are getting in the way, like some of the ones that I mentioned. And a lot of times parents check off a ton of things on the list. And then that's kind of an eye-opening moment for them when they're like, oh, Yeah, of course, she needs to be able to like follow through on a task or follow multi-step directions or regulate her emotions. And like that's required of her, but she really struggles with that. So, of course, that situation expectation is hard for her. So, when we do that, when we break it down, then we can talk about how do we build these skills. It allows parents to lead with empathy. Another thing that comes from Dr. Green, right, is the reminder that she's not giving me a hard time, she's having a hard time. So reminding yourself that your kid is not being a pain because they're choosing, to push your buttons or be difficult, as we're talking about, but because something about this is hard for them. And if we can lead with empathy with our children, we're less likely to respond from a place of dysregulation ourselves. We're more likely to respond from a logical and calm place, and we're more likely to be able to be responsive to their needs.
All right, I want to circle back to something that you said that I was like, "Ooh, I totally do this." So you mentioned sticker charts and rewards and consequences. And it's interesting. My son goes to a school where they actually have a point system,
Yeah.
which he's very highly motivated for.
Yeah.
And I have mixed feelings about it because there's level 3, which is the highest, 2 and 1, and they get different privileges.
Mhm.
And each day they get a certain amount of points and it's averaged. And he's now on level 3, which is the top, and he's greatly enjoyed it. But he had a really bad day one day last week, and so his points were lower, and he's been a bit stressed about he wants to stay on level 3. Now he's been stressed but yet motivated. He's like, "Oh, I came back with 113 out of 115." He was super proud of himself. Like, just you could tell the pride. But so I guess my question is, I see it as a motivator. I also see it as a stressor.
Yeah.
And so, but it's helping him in certain ways. So
Yeah.
what is the,
So I am
Yeah.
not, when I was initially trained in social work, I was definitely trained from a more behaviorist lens. So doing
Yeah.
a lot of like point systems and like check and check out, positive behavior intervention systems and stuff like that in school. What I have come to understand is that sticker charts and reward systems have a purpose, but they're often overgeneralized and used for every single behavioral issue when it's not the right intervention. And so helping people kind of understand and helping parents understand what are these things actually helpful for and how do I create them in ways that work? And sometimes they don't work for anybody in the family, and that's totally okay because it's a system that parents have to keep track of and stay on top of, and it's a whole thing that may be overwhelming.
Mhm.
And also, if the kid doesn't have the skills to meet the thing, then the motivation doesn't matter. So the analogy that I often use is like, if I offered you $1 million to do the uneven bars in gymnastics, you are highly motivated, but you don't have any of the skills to do it. So
Yeah.
motivation is not the only issue, right? And when it's like something like toilet training, when your kid just literally, you just have to incentivize the 2-year-old to like want to do something,
Mhm.
and motivation is the only issue, we can use incentive systems. Humans are programmed towards incentive systems. We all love it when we get gifts or get surprises or when our boss gives us praise, like it's not that incentives are bad. It's just we have to understand when they work and when they don't. And we have to do a deeper analysis around what's happening with the behavior. And sometimes when we have these school-wide incentive systems, if we don't support the kids based on their profile and their needs, then they're going to constantly live at the lower levels of that system. And they're going to be blamed for not being able to be successful when we haven't properly supported them.
Now that makes sense. I guess in this, the way you broke it down makes a lot of sense. Because like going back to my son, like his school is very structured and they're helping them with to have those skills to achieve that. And they also talk about like earning it instead of having things taken away. It's not like, oh, you didn't do this, you took your points away, you earn them.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of schools do these things because it's what we've always done.
Mhm.
There's still some research around like having the public display of points, right? And having everybody else know what level you're on, that can be like incredibly shaming. And I think
Yeah, I
sometimes,
didn't love that, to be honest. When I saw it was on their board, I'm like, ooh, that's hard.
yeah, right. And it goes back to that human drive for wanting to belong and wanting to do well, right? Kids want to please adults. So kids will work within whatever system we give them because they don't know anything different. So it's
Yeah.
really up to us sometimes as adults to like dismantle some of these systems that have always been in place because there's other ways to achieve the same goal. A lot of these schools are really stuck on these point systems because it gives the educators something concrete to hold on to
Mm-hmm.
or something concrete to use. Like, oh, you're not going to get your points if you don't do X, Y, Z, right? Which all goes back to compliance.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're working with kids with challenging behavior, compliance is not our goal. Helping them learn to regulate themselves, helping them learn to make different choices is our goal. I'm not trying to raise robots.
Right.
And so I think sometimes there can be space for us to push back on how these systems are used.
Well, you mentioned regulation. So I have seen dysregulation in my child and in myself and in
Yeah.
others. So can you talk a little bit about regulation, dysregulation, what it is and how it presents in kids?
Yeah. So, there's emotion regulation and there's self regulation. Emotional regulation falls into self regulation, but some people don't realize that self regulation is also like a really important thing, right? Your ability to regulate your attention, your ability to regulate your focus, your ability to kind of like maintain certain body posture or follow societal or social expectations, right? Like, how do I walk in the hallway? How do I sit at my desk? How do I sit on the carpet? Like, all of those things require self regulation. And then emotional dysregulation, which a lot of us are more familiar with, is really just the capacity for people to not externalize their emotions, right? We all go through a lot of different emotions throughout the day. And I get into the science with families and I get into the science with kids around the amygdala, right? The emotion center of the brain. A lot of people have seen Inside Out by
Mm-hmm.
now, so they have a little bit of a sense, but you have this little center of your brain. It's really fully developed by the age of 2. And that's like the smoke alarm of your brain. And it's responsible for fight and flight and like that stress response system that keeps us safe. And some kids have an overactive amygdala. It goes off for everything. Like those, if you've ever lived in New York City, like those smoke alarms in your apartments that go off because you took a shower because it can't tell the difference between
Yes.
steam and smoke. And so you have kids who like have a really big reaction for what we as adults think are small problems because they have this super highway to this emotion center of their brain. And Dr. Ned Hallowell kind of talks about specifically around ADHD as having like a Ferrari engine, but with bicycle brakes.
Hmm.
And so you have this incredibly powerful emotion center of the brains, but none of the braking system that's required to help kids harness it or regulate it. And that part of your brain, the executive functioning part, lives in the prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead. That's not done developing till you're 25. So people are used to toddlers, right? Toddlers, preschoolers being disgruntled little Tasmanian devils. We expect them to be emotional beings and illogical. But as you get into elementary school, when that behavior persists, that's when people start to be like, why is this happening? Or why haven't they kind of like caught up yet?
So if it doesn't get fully developed till 25 and then someone does have ADHD with that Ferrari brain and the bicycle brakes and that
Yeah.
impulsivity, what are ways besides medication, which I will admit I feel can be very useful for some children.
Yeah.
What are tools to help them regulate?
Yeah. So the first thing is to just recognize. That's why I like to start with the science behind it. I have a YouTube video that I often share with families that's really kid friendly that just goes through the process of like, they call it flipping your lid, which comes from Dr. Dan Siegel's work. He wrote the book, The Whole Brain Child, and it talks about that, that nervous system response, right? It's an automatic nervous system response. It's not a choice. And so when kids understand like, oh, this is what happens. It's a physiological response. It's why I like freeze, shut down, and hide, or it's why I yell and scream and stomp or throw things, right? Going into fight, flight. It's why I do those things. It can normalize for kids why this is hard, and it reduces the shame. And it also helps parents understand why in the moment it feels like your child is not processing what you're saying because they're not, because their language processing centers are offline. It also helps parents understand why when they talk about the situation after the child is calmed down, the child can say, yeah, I should have done this, I should have done that, but they can't do it in the moment because they don't have access to their whole brain. When their emotion centers are activated, the rest of your brain starts shutting down. So any logic, reasoning, problem solving that you have capacity for when you're calm, you don't have when you're dysregulated. And it's the same thing with adults. We say and do things all the time when we're in a place of emotion that we wouldn't say or do when we're calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so helping people kind of recognize that process is helpful. It starts a lot with attunement, helping parents recognize what are the early warning signs that your child's kind of going off the rails, and not the yelling, screaming, shouting. That's like too far gone. But like, what are those first signs? Are they, tensing up their face? Do you see their shoulders hunch? Are they clenching their fists? Do they grunt? Do they make some kind of noise? Is there repetitive movement? Helping parents not miss those early warning signs, because that can really be the best window of opportunity to help your child regulate before they're too far flipped. And then working with parents on leading with support when they notice those early warning signs. We as adults often want to use logic and reason. We want to explain things. But when we understand that that part of the brain is not accessible to them, we have to get parents to switch the tactics. So it's like, I know you're really frustrated. You wanted the blue plate. Oh, it's really hard when we can't have ice cream when we really, really want it because ice cream is so yummy, right? Like just doing that reflexive listening and like mirroring back to your child what they're saying can be really, really helpful in the moment to allow them to move through the feeling without trying to get them to suppress it.
So it's really being observant and present and picking up on these
Yeah.
little cues. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about what parents can do when the child has gone beyond it's starting to percolate and it goes to full boil. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
You've made it through the first couple of years with your kiddo, and life is crazy. You need Parent Savers. Each week, we provide moms with the practical information they need to help preserve their sanity. With the help of our experts, parents of toddlers get the superhero strength they need to tackle the world and the next sturdy diaper. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Parent Savers podcast." Parent Savers, empowering new parents. You've decided to give your baby breast milk. We want to help. We're the Boob Group, a group of moms and experts here to support you in your goals, whether you're breastfeeding, pumping, or something in between. Each week, a group of experienced moms openly discuss their success, their struggles, and society's impact on how they feed their babies. We provide an honest, natural, and judgment-free approach to breastfeeding, pumping, milk sharing, and more. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Boob Group podcast." The Boob Group, where moms know breast.
Okay, so we're back. So the first step is to be observant and learn the cues. But what happens if we either miss them or aren't able to tamper things down? And then what can parents do when the child is already dysregulated? Is just kind of like hunker down and let it pass? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. I use a boiling pot analogy to talk about the different levels of dysregulation. So those early warning signs are those tiny little bubbles at the bottom of the pot when you first put it on the boil. And the goal or the role of the parent in these situations is always trying to be turning the heat down under the pot. So you really want to avoid like sarcasm, rhetorical questions. How many times have I told you? Like any of that kind of stuff just turns the heat back up. Sometimes you'll get kids who engage in like refusal. I don't want to, I'm not gonna, or like physically they refuse. Sometimes you get kids who are like, why, how come, since when, right? They start asking you those challenging questions. And a lot of the work is about helping parents avoid the power struggles. How do we maintain the boundaries or expectations that we've set without getting sucked into the power struggle?
How do we do that?
So when your child issues a challenging question, right, it's really not about the question. It's more a challenge to your authority. And so oftentimes repeating the direction and walking away can be helpful. You don't want to engage the challenge. If you find yourself saying, because I'm the parent or because I said so, that is an indicator that you have accepted the invitation to the argument party and you are getting sucked into the rabbit hole. And so we have to just not accept those arguments. We have to just steer clear of them. We have to avoid drawing lines in the sand. I often encourage families to use when then or first then statements instead of if then. if then, like, if you don't do this, then you can't do that. Because if implies that it's an option first.
Mm.
And also if then statements become really negative, right? If you don't, then you won't. And then your kid's like, all right, bet. And then you're off to the races, right? Of a battle of wills.
Mm-hmm.
When then and first then is not optional, right? When you do this or first do this is not optional. And it's also positively framed. When you finish your breakfast, then you can have your tablet. First put on your shoes and then we can go outside. And then we simply wait. Or sometimes we become a broken record. We have to remember too that when kids are getting dysregulated or in an emotional state, their processing gets slower. And like we can't rush them through it. And so a lot of times, just as a parent, for us to pause, for us to take a deep breath, for us to regulate ourselves can really go a long way in helping our kid regulate as well.
So, what tools can the child use when they're starting to feel those internal cues? Because it sounds like the parents are watching and listening and trying to help turn the heat down. But do kids start to learn those cues as well? And because I'm assuming that's going to be one of the first steps of them learning to regulate themselves, because the parents are not always going to be there. The kids will be in school or, and out in society. So what are the tools for the kids to be like, oh, I'm starting to feel this?
Yeah, so it really starts with co-regulation, right? When babies are born, they cry, we pick them up, we shush them, we rock them, we do those things. And babies eventually learn how to settle themselves because we start co-regulating with them. And so it really depends on where your child is in their ability to do that. Some kids are very self-aware and are, hey, I want help with this. Hey, this is hard for me. I want some more tools. And they're more open to feedback. Other kids are like, I didn't cause this. I yelled because you did this. And they're just not in the same place yet. So they're not as available to learn the tools and strategies. So we first have to kind of assess where the kid is. And then once we do that, we can slowly over time work on building their capacity, work on building their skills. And a lot of this happens through proactive conversations. We talk about potential triggers or potential obstacles outside of the moment before they happen, and we talk about a plan. So I know some kids, socially go on play dates and there might be conflict. So I've had a lot of conversations around like, hey, we're having so-and-so over today. Are there any toys that we definitely don't want our friend to play with? Maybe we should put them away. How do we make that decision? Or what should we play with our friend today? Because I know sometimes when you guys don't agree on what to play, that can be hard for you. Or, hey, so-and-so is coming over. What are you going to do if you need some help? Or if you're getting really frustrated, what can we do? So we're proactively having those conversations, helping them make a plan for themselves. That is hard for me. What are my options when that happens? Oh, I can run to mom. I can ask for help. My parents give me a script for the things that I can say to a friend when they, do something I don't like, right? I teach kids how to use their assertive voice, but the difference between being assertive versus being mean. And so we do a lot of role play and practice. And then sometimes in the moment, we start with prompting, hey, remember, what did we say we can do when we're starting to get frustrated? Are you going to go do it yourself or should we do it together? But it really starts with trust. If your child doesn't feel emotionally safe, they're not going to be available for those strategies.
And that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk a little bit about school, because I feel like often in a lot of public school systems, everyone's just trying to fit the same hole in the same peg, and it doesn't always fit. So what are some ways that parents can advocate for their kids in school that may not be equipped to support kids who fall outside of the quote unquote norm, and then they're seen as the difficult child?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work with families around this as well. And it's really about helping the parent learn first, what are my child's strengths and weaknesses and what does my child need? So learning more about your child, because we can't advocate if we don't know what their needs are. And then also understanding and educating yourself around what are the services and processes in my school? What is available to me? What are my rights? Because when you reach out to the school for support, Some schools are great at like, yes, absolutely, let's do this. Some other schools pump the brakes, and you have to know what your rights are in order to use the right keywords and kind of push back or say, no, my child needs this because of XYZ. When it comes to receiving support in a school setting, it's all about how is this impacting their functioning in school. This could be academic functioning, this could be social functioning, or it could be behavioral. But we're always trying to make the case. So helping parents kind of document what are the concerns that are showing up, how often are they happening, what are the impacts from this, whether it's an academic challenge, behavioral or social challenge, documenting how often are you getting a call about a challenge on the playground, how often is your child asking to leave the class because they're feeling stressed by something that's happening. We have to make the educational impact argument.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, we start thinking about, as we've done the unpacking, what tools or strategies are going to work for my kid. And as adults, we often think something's going to be helpful, but if we don't include the child's voice in the process, we don't actually know what feels good for them, what helps them regulate, what helps them calm down. Some kids prefer a quiet setting or, a break to do some coloring and listen to music. Some other kids want to go chuck a basketball against the wall or bang on a drum because they have to release it. And so we have to ask the kid, like, does this help? Does that help? How do you think about this? All right, let's try that out for a week or two, see how it goes. Like it's a collaborative and iterative process until we kind of find the things that work. And because kids are growing and changing, what works for them one year may not work for them the next year.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be open to those changes and that process.
Yeah, my daughter just last week asked for noise canceling headphones, and she's never had that before. And she just said sometimes the classroom gets really loud and it's hard for her to concentrate. And so I was really proud of her. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for letting me know. And we 100% can get that. And she just this morning, she got, they came from Amazon last night, these pink, they're quite big
Huge.
noise canceling headphones that she so excitedly took to school. I can't wait to hear how that worked out. So I do have a question about when maybe it's identified that the quote unquote difficult child, they have different challenges and we're identifying how to support them. How does one get family on board with changing their lens from, they think it's I love how you described, it's not the child necessarily wants to behave this way. Sometimes it's coming, like you said, it's coming from deeper places. They're not trying necessarily to be obstinate. So how do we get family or friends on board, especially maybe grandparents that have, in my day, this is how we did it, so, because I think it's a different, now that we have more science and data behind it, it's a different understanding of behavior and different neurodiversities.
Yeah. So I think that the kids do well if they can applies to adults too.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to do a little bit of analysis around the adults we're trying to get on our team to kind of think about where are they and are they in a place where they're ready to receive new information. Some adults are not, and it's not really helpful for a parent who's trying to raise a child who has additional needs to spend a lot of energy on somebody who's not open or willing to have that conversation. And so then the conversation I have with families is much more around how do I shore up your confidence as a parent? Because that can really be hard, especially when you're at family gatherings and you feel judged as a parent or you feel like you're failing because of the comments. So how do we help you feel confident in your parenting plan? And then also, how do you set boundaries with the people who are going to overstep and try to tell you, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. So there's that side of it for people who aren't ready or available yet. And then for people who want more information, there's so much out there now. There's great podcasts, TED Talks. It depends on do they want to read a book? Do they want to, follow a Facebook page? One of my favorite ones to share out is NeuroWild. If you've ever heard of that, she is an autistic speech and language pathologist, but she just distills so much great information into these cute little graphics and cartoons that she creates that you're just like, that makes total sense. And she explains all of these, I say it in quotes, complex things about what it means to be neurodivergent in a way that you can really share with children. And I find her content is really easily digestible. And so I do a lot of education, and sometimes people just have to see it in action, right? So when you become confident in your parenting when you have everything firing on all the cylinders and people see the differences in the reactions and how your child is functioning and they see what's happening, then they're like, oh, what you're doing is working. And, I've also had it sometimes where, you leave the kid with a weekend for the grandparents and then all of a sudden they charge a different tune too because they realize that their whole by might is not going to work, especially if you have a, demand avoidant kid who's going to equalize with you every time you try to give them a directive.
Mm. Yeah, that's really helpful because I feel like I've had conversations with relatives where if a child was physically, had a physical ailment, there's a certain understanding, but mental emotional difference is kind of invisible in certain ways, and it's not as maybe accepted, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
It's not because of this whole belief of kids do well if they want to. So they still very deeply believe that behavior is a choice. And you're spoiling the kid if you don't teach them right from wrong. But people can know right from wrong and still have a hard time doing the right thing because they don't have all the skills to be able to do it. And going back to what you said, I use this analogy a lot too. Like if your child had a reading disability, we would never say C-A-T, cat. How many times do I have to tell you at? Your teacher talked to you about it. I talked to you about it. Your father had this conversation with you. We're sick of going over this with you. We would never do that for a child who had a reading disability, but that is exactly how we talk to children who have behavioral challenges or behavioral disabilities. We shame them about it. We talk to children about how they should behave, but we don't spend a lot of time teaching. It takes a lot of time before kids can really master something. You think about how often a kid hears the alphabet from the time they're born until the time they can see a letter in a word and sound out a word. I mean, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times has a child seen the letter A before they're able to actually recognize it and say the sound independently, right? But we don't have that same patience with behavior. We expect, I told you what to do, and therefore you should be able to do it. But if we look at challenging behavior from the lens of it being a skill deficit, then it's much easier for us to show up with empathy.
At what age might there be some signs? Because I think maybe I'm kind of guessing this. I remember we were talking about like toddlers are expected, in a sense, to have tantrums. Is it the school age, or is there something that someone can look at within how a toddler regulates themselves or how long it takes them to regulate from dysregulation that might give parents the clue of like, I need to learn some different support than I might learn just in the mainstream?
Yeah, so this is obviously very individual to the child and also depends on like the parenting tools and the family home environment and the school environment, because sometimes kids are having meltdowns because something is causing stress, whether at school or at home, and the meltdown is not necessarily caused by, a lagging skill, but is more so, a reaction to a stress. And so I do a lot of work with families around kind of unpacking that and figuring out, is this within the range of typical development, or is there something that's more concerning? I always tell families that whether there's a diagnosis or not, if something is stressing you or it's causing you to feel overwhelmed as a parent, it's worth seeking support on. And that's kind of where I come in as a parenting coach. While I could do pediatric therapy, I often find that when I train the adults that kids spend the most time with, that's where you see the results. And when parents feel like they have a plan, when they feel like, okay, I know why my child is melting down, I know what it's going to look like, I know what I should do, they feel less dysregulated because they have that plan. And sometimes that alone can make the difference in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when I work with families, we'll try things out. And if behaviors shift and the parent is feeling more relaxed and if things are improving, then it's like, okay, maybe it's something we monitor for, but it's not something we necessarily need to proceed with evaluations now. Sometimes we do all the things and it's still not enough. And then it's like, okay, I think we're missing some pieces to the puzzle. Let's talk about what an evaluation might look like. What providers do we need to bring in? What evaluations do we need to look for? What do we think we need to kind of dig a little further into?
I like that you're having it be like the parents really need to have that foundation because that can really help the child. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And also because even if you go through the evaluation process and get a diagnosis, it's just words on paper. It doesn't always tell you how to respond to your child in the moment. And so the work that I do with parents can happen whether there's a diagnosis or not, whether you're considering a diagnosis or not. The parents still have to feel confident and competent in what they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we're going to take another break. When we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? We'll be right back.
Congrats! You're pregnant! Now, what do you do during the next 9 months? You need Preggy Pals. We educate and entertain expectant mothers and those hoping to become pregnant. Each episode features pregnant moms-to-be as well as experts. Together, we explore topics aimed to embrace pregnancy and empower women as they give birth to their babies. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Preggy Pals podcast." And be sure to visit newmommymedia.com to check out our other parenting shows, Newbies, Parent Savers, Twin Talks, and The Boop Group. Preggy Pals, your pregnancy, your way.
We are back. So you can answer this from your expert place, or you can also answer this from being mom. So I'm
Of 3.
curious you have 3. That's very
I
impressive.
have 3. Yeah, they're 10, 6, and 2. So I'm
you got
in
your
the
hands
thick of
full.
it.
So what is that final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer?
There is no one right way to parent. There is so much information out there around, you should do this, you should do that, respond this way, respond that way. You know, all the TikTok videos and the blogs and the Instagram accounts and the books and and it's not anything new, right? Dr. Spock many decades ago to all the Big Little Feelings and Dr. Becky now. And so parents have a really hard time being like, which thing am I supposed to do for my kid? And like, how do I decide what works? And so it is so important for families to just be attuned to who they are as adults. Like, what works for me as a parent? Because just because Susie next door does this and it works for her kid doesn't mean that I feel comfortable with that strategy, or that it's going to work for me. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that. But different parents parent differently. Different families prioritize different things. Screen time, for example, can vary so greatly across families. And I don't believe there's any one right way. Right? If you love your kids, if you're worried about what's best for your kids, then you're probably doing a good job. And so, reducing the guilt, reducing the shame, reducing the competitiveness of like parenting, am I making a cool bento box lunch or not, is really, really important. I also think parents need to recognize like we don't parent in villages anymore, but you still have to make one. And especially for my parents of neurodivergent kids, it's so critical that you find other parents who are on a similar journey. Because if your whole friend group is only parenting neurotypical kids, you're just always going to feel like a fish out of water. People are not going to get it. They're not going to understand why you have to leave a party early. They're not going to understand why your kid's sitting in a corner. They're not going to understand why your kid got upset because they didn't get the cupcake that they wanted at the party, or vice versa, whatever the thing is. And so you need to be around people who you don't have to say anything to, they just get it. And
That
so
is
finding that
huge.
village is so important.
I have a couple of little different friend groups, and for a while I did feel kind of the odd man out. And then one of my close friends, her daughter got diagnosed with ADHD, and she actually said to me, she's like, "I now see what you were going through." And she's like, I can't believe she did. She admitted, she's like, "I did judge you, and I'm sorry, because now I get it." And I was like, oh my God, I felt so seen.
Yeah. I mean, and we're taught to judge, right? Because we're also taught that like if a child is acting out, the parent's not properly disciplining, right? And it still goes back to the whole societal belief around like kids do well if they want to. And if a child's acting out, it's because the parent's spoiling them.
Yeah.
Versus, the parent is doing the best that they can with the tools that we have, and their child's having a hard time. And we would all benefit if people just showed a little bit more empathy to each other.
Oh, this has been so wonderful. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, so I'm located in New Jersey, but my website is balancekidsnj.com. I have social media, but I'm not great at staying active on there. But, you can book. I always start with a free 30-minute phone call so parents can learn more about what I do, or schools if you want interested in professional development. And then we kind of take it from there.
This is so wonderful. I will make sure all those resources are on the show notes. Nina, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure speaking with you.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
In a world where single moms face countless challenges, the Single Mom Podcast offers a space of support and empowerment. Each episode offers stories of triumph, practical strategies, and heartfelt support to those on the journey of solo parenting. With a touch of humor and a wealth of inspiration, this podcast invites single moms everywhere to join a community that understands and uplifts. Discover the power of shared experiences and the strength of single mothers, because together they are truly unstoppable.